Hey, Katie, Tommy Givens here, professor of the course. Thanks so much for your work in weeks 1 and 2. Or week 1, both discussions, and I wanted to send you a video here by way of reply. Gives me a chance to say hello a little more personally as we get the course going, and also offer you some reaction to what you've written in both of the response forums here in week 1. And first of all, I just wanted to highlight the good job that you do making sense of faith in Habakkuk, in contrast with what the Lord tells Habakkuk is the way of the proud or the puffed up or the arrogant. And I think by framing faith that way, we get a little bit more of a sense of what it involves. It is responsive to the particular circumstances that Habakkuk is describing and complaining to God about. That, the Chaldeans have been allowed by God to inflict all kinds of terrible harm, rape, pillage, destruction on Israel and Habakkuk's generation. And he's outraged at this. And the response that comes to him from the Lord, that becomes the word of the Lord to the people, is that while these circumstances might seem to invite people to give up on God, to grow cynical, to basically replicate the sort of pride and arrogance that they see among their enemies because it's not worth it to try to be just, that in contrast to that, the just will live by faith, that God, the God of Israel, remains trustworthy, and that loving God and neighbor as God has commanded, even in these dire circumstances where cynicism is lurking around every corner, that this is still the way to life for the future of Israel and by extension, other peoples of the world. You can see here something that's important, I think, in terms of how Paul uses this passage with the kind of synergy between the faith of God and the faith of the human. When Paul says the justice of God is revealed from faith to faith, I think that he is getting at how the faith of the just here in Habakkuk depends on the faith of God, that God will act in good faith, that God is trustworthy. And that's what the trust or the faith of the human grows from. It's a fruit of God's own faith or faithfulness. And that is now reaching its fullness, you might say, in the life of the Messiah, according to Paul, where the faith of God and the faith of the human are one. And this life of faith is spilling out to people like these non-Jewish recipients of this letter who have been baptized into the Messiah's life and are thus partaking in the faith of his life. And this is going to then sort of express itself as Paul teaches the people in the way that they treat one another, how they are generous with one another, especially around the table, in the same way that God has been generous with them, and a variety of other subjects in terms of their life that Paul is going to address that are informed by this faith that is a gift of God, the faith of God that inspires their faith in their life together. Most immediately in the next stages of the letter, it's going to be about not giving in to this temptation to judge one another, try to rule over one another, but instead trusting God to be the judge, that God will provide for the way that they're going to live together. They don't need to pretend, some of them, that God has authorized them by virtue of the law or something else to be the judges or the rulers of others, but instead the way forward for the community and for us is the way of faith that trusts God to govern and guide our life together. So good stuff here that you've got started in the first forum dealing with Habakkuk and how that plays into Romans. I love what you say here in the second forum, building on Taubes, that theology has become this supposedly discrete, overly professionalized field of inquiry, that is neatly distinguishable from all kinds of other areas of study. And the result is both the impoverishment of theology, but also of those other areas of study, because it turns out that the all kinds of literature, culture, history, sociology, political developments have all been influenced by theology, theological commitments, and arguably even by the way that God has been at work and been revealed in the history of the people of God and of the world. So I do think that there's a lot to gain when we study philosophy, cultural studies, etc., um, as part of, in some ways, theology, as opposed to treating theology as something independent. And that's really true in spades of Romans, because it's been such a legacy kind of book for the Western world, especially all kinds of uh, sort of traditions of psychology, political order, and understanding that have effectively been interpretations of Romans, not always good ones, but drawn from this text. And so that's how we want to try to engage it, as having produced this sort of rich tradition history. We will talk a little bit more, as I think you're eager for, about the sort of socio-political context of Romans. Not so much in terms of what we could speculate about with what's going on at Rome and Rome at the time. I mean, we can talk about that kind of stuff. But what we want to deal with especially is the socio-political context that the letter to the Romans itself kind of assumes, indicates, and this has to do with tensions among different people, different Greek people coming from different Greek backgrounds and now being welcomed into this promised family of the people of Abraham, and learning how to understand the law of the God of Israel, now that they're following Israel's Messiah as Lord, learning the law of Moses as somehow the guide of their life, not misusing it, but using it wisely and in the light of what the Messiah means. These are all socio-political concerns. They play out economically, in a variety of other ways as well. So we will be paying attention to that in terms of how what Paul is saying is landing in very concrete ways in the latter parts of the letter. So look forward to exploring that with you. If you want to reply to this video, you're welcome to do that. No pressure to, though. Just if you're not going to reply with much, maybe at least give me a one-word received or something like that, so that I know the video came through and you were able to see it. Thanks again for some good work in week 1, and looking forward to more conversation with you throughout the summer.